let's come to understand the process of leucopoiesis, that is synthesis or formation of fresh white blood cells. We've already seen what is erythropoiesis, so today we will talk about leucopoiesis. Just as erythropoiesis is triggered by erythropoietin, there are certain hormonal triggers even for leucopoiesis. Two main types of hormonal triggers are known. One is called as interleukins. Interleukins, in fact, a group of hormones. They are labeled as IL-3, IL-5 and so on. That is interleukin 3, interleukin 5 and so on. The other trigger happens to be colony stimulating factor. This colony stimulating factor is specific for a particular type of leukocyte, that is granulocyte CSF, GCSF, granulocyte colony stimulating factor. That's how they are named. So they are specific triggers for particular type of leukocytes. These triggers, they actually are responsible for triggering the process of leucopoiesis. But in addition to triggering the synthesis of leukocytes, they are also responsible for enhancing their protective potential. That is, these leukocytes in general are supposed to defend the body from invading microbes and so on. That capacity, that potency is enhanced by these triggers. Just as we discussed during erythropoiesis, there are stem cells. There are bone marrow stem cells, hemopoietic stem cells you can call them, which we had called them as hematoblasts or hemoblast. The process of leucopoiesis also starts with the same kind of multipotent stem cell, totipotent stem cell. That is also called as hematoblast. This hematoblast, depending upon the trigger, then becomes a committed cell. See, here is the hematoblast, which depending upon the trigger becomes a committed cell. Committed cell in the sense whether it is going to become what kind of cell, that is what is determined. And there are two kinds of committed cells: myeloid stem cell and lymphoid stem cell. So depending upon whether it is a myeloid stem cell or a lymphoid stem cell, it is decided whether that cell is going to result into a lymphocyte or the other type of cell. See, the myeloid stem cell is going to give rise to all types of granulocytes and monocyte, while the lymphoid stem cell will be resulting only into lymphocyte. Myeloid stem cell would then either become a myeloblast or a monoblast. This is a myeloblast or a monoblast. That myeloblast would then result into three types of granulocyte, and monoblast would follow a procedure and would result into monocyte. This myeloblast then starts acquiring lysosomes. This myeloblast starts acquiring lysosomes, and then it gradually becomes a promyelocyte. Promyelocyte. So this becomes a promyelocyte. Myeloblast becomes a promyelocyte. So now it has a large number of lysosomes in it. This promyelocyte then starts acquiring granules in it, the particular type of granules. That is depending upon whether it is going to be eosinophil or basophil or neutrophil, a particular type of granules it will start acquiring. And then it will become a myelocyte. Myelocyte in the sense it is eosinophilic myelocyte or neutrophilic myelocyte or basophilic myelocyte. Then it starts developing a particular kind of nucleus. It starts having an arc-shaped nucleus. And then it becomes a band cell, eosinophilic band cell or neutrophilic band cell or basophilic band cell. And finally, it results into formation of the particular type of leukocyte, eosinophil, neutrophil and basophil, with the particular type of granules in it. Whereas when we talk about formation of a monocyte, the monoblast then becomes promonocyte. Promonocyte. Promonocyte then becomes a monocyte. Similar process of development it will follow. Now, monocyte actually is supposed to be a kind of phagocytic cell, but then it is also capable of showing diaperesis. It comes out of the blood cells, it gets into a connective tissue and then gets transformed into a macrophage. So it can become a wandering macrophage also. That is what a monocyte can do. While the lymphoid stem cell then becomes a lymphoblast, lymphoblast then becomes a pro-lymphocyte, and pro-lymphocyte finally becomes a lymphocyte. Now lymphocyte, see, formation of lymphocyte is one stage. It needs to be triggered, it needs to be activated. This triggering can happen either in the thymus or it can happen in the bone marrow itself. Accordingly, it will become a T lymphocyte or a B lymphocyte. So different types of T and B lymphocytes we have already discussed while talking about the types of blood cells. But at times, this lymphocyte can get transformed into a plasma cell. Plasma cell is something which can generate large number of antibody molecules. That is to overcome the invasion by pathogens or certain infections. Large number of antibodies are required, which the plasma cells can help in synthesis of. There could be a sudden decline in the number of leukocytes. The condition is called as leukopenia. It can be seen for a variety of reasons. Sometimes there is a serious cancerous infection, some malignancy, and the chemotherapy that is administered can be responsible for severe effects on the bone marrow, and there could be a remarkable decline in the number of leukocytes. Whereas at times the number can increase for certain reasons. The commonest one is if there is a common cold. Then in such a case, the number of eosinophils can drastically increase The condition is called as eosinophilia. Whereas in certain other infections also the number of leukocytes in general can increase, which is then called as leukocytosis. Now leukopenia and leukocytosis are two extreme conditions. Otherwise the number of leukocytes can be adequately maintained in the blood. But then we need to keep one thing in mind. The number of leukocytes and number of erythrocytes contained in the blood and the number of leukocytes and number of erythrocytes contained in the bone marrow, there's a remarkable difference in the two. As we have already seen, the number of leukocytes and number of erythrocytes, it could be almost in the proportion 1:400. Number of leukocytes contained in the blood and number of leukocytes contained in the bone marrow, if you compare, the leukocytes contained in the bone marrow are almost 10 to 20 times the leukocytes contained in the blood. The other parameter is number of leukocytes in the bone marrow, it's almost 3 times the number of erythrocytes. The proportion, it's 3:1 almost. But these leukocytes have a very short lifespan. So a large number of them, they just disintegrate, and some who survive can then be released into the bloodstream, so the number remains appropriate there. Now, as we have seen, there is a hormonal control on the number of leukocytes. As we have seen, the triggers can be interleukins or colony stimulating factors. These colony stimulating factors at times can be artificially administered. That is synthetically produced CSF can be introduced into the blood. This may be required if a person is undergoing a serious chemotherapy wherein the bone marrow can be significantly affected and the number of leukocytes can be drastically low. The CSF can stimulate formation of leukocytes and the number can increase to some extent. Of course, this may not actually match the standard or the ideal number, but then this can cover up the tremendous loss in the number of leukocytes that's happening because of chemotherapy. Another thing is, whenever there is a transplant, maybe liver transplant or kidney transplant, that kind of things, then that times these artificial CSF may require to be administered so that the resistance by the body to that artificially implanted component can be checked and its rejection can be avoided. That's another video in the sequel. Just keep watching. Do like them, subscribe to them, and share them with your friends and family.